So I've been through infantry training, airborne training, air assault training, EMT training, sniper training, Ranger School, Special Forces Qualification Course, SFAUC, which is Special Forces Urban Assault Course. I've also been through SFARDC, which is a premier close quarters battle and hostage rescue course. I've been through, close air support training, and I've been to combat.
But did you know that Dave Smith opened for Skankfest? Welcome back to
Tommy's house.
All right. On the subject of expertise, we are doing an interesting series here, Michael. We are bringing on various experts, had a lot of success off of the episode with Natasha talking about the legal expertise pertaining to the war over the last 18 months with Israel and Gaza. And now it'd be really nice to have some military expertise in this conversation. So we'd like to welcome to the show Nick Freitas. So glad to have you here. Green Beret, Special Forces, and Internet Badass. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me on.
I wanted to say, just to start it off, like you look like when Shrek turns into the handsome prince. You ever get that doppelganger? Like you like an animated Disney character who like saves the day. So
I do. I have never been told that before, but thank you. I do appreciate it all the same.
We have to put it up on the screen. It's he didn't say
like
that.
Like an affect of like a very good natured. You're like, oh, Nick's here, great.
Thank God.
Thank God.
We need that. We're just two nebby Jewish boys. So when you come into the picture, we feel safe. We feel safe on this call. Okay, Nick, I wanted to start off. I mean, you have a background in the military, Green Beret, Special Forces. How does that rank with like you versus a Navy SEAL? Like who would win hand-to-hand combat?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, whenever you're talking about inter-service rivalry, we're always going to go with our own service.
Right.
I think the primary difference that you look at when you look at the whole blanket of special operations, right? Like that's the broader term that includes everything. So that's Navy SEALs, that's Rangers, that's Delta, that's Dev Group, which is SEAL Team 6. Mm-hmm. It's PJs, all that stuff. What is unique about Special Forces within this space is that we're the guys that specialize in unconventional warfare, counterinsurgency. That's kind of like our bread and butter. Mm-hmm. We also do counterterrorism. We do, evacuation operations. We do a lot of different stuff, but we are usually the guys that, our very, very specific expertise is the counterinsurgency and unconventional warfare aspect.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this. When you see these public conversations unfolding, watching even comedians, commentators, hobbyists talking about war, right? Like I'm a musician too. And like when I hear people talk about music and they start to like get into the details, I can spot very quickly when they don't know what they're talking about. Or like, some guy who fancies himself an expert in food and starts to say, ooh, is that a gas streak? What is that? And like a chef will be like, oh God, they like roll their eyes. But to the layperson, they have a lot of trouble telling the difference between sort of a informed hobbyist and an expert. And in this conversation of experts versus commentators, I'm sure you saw, did you see the Douglas Murray, Dave Smith, Joe Rogan conversation?
Yeah, I haven't watched all, what is it, like 2 hours and 58 minutes? I've watched portions.
But it did spark this debate. But first about like experts versus commentators. But I just wanted to ask you, when you see that conversation unfolding, like how big of an eye roll do you give it as someone who's seen active war and been in it? Like, how does it make you feel?
It depends, and I'll tell you why. It's how do we define expertise, mm-hmm. right? Like, so obviously someone can be an expert in a particular topic because they have a wealth of knowledge and information and they've studied a great deal on it. Like there are historians. John Keegan's a perfect example of this. John Keegan's never been to war, but that guy knows more about the history of war than probably anybody I ever served with, and that's valuable information, mm-hmm. right? That guy can provide a lot of insight and historical knowledge to a particular topic. And then there's also expertise that comes from firsthand experience. Mm-hmm. And that's also valuable. And I would say that the kind of the height of expertise, if you will, is when someone has a good balance of knowledge and understanding, intellectual understanding, combined with some degree of, personal experience or having to actually go out and, live in that world or conduct operations or whatever else it might be. Like, a thing that I would say is like when you watch that whole thing with Joe Rogan, Douglas Murray and Dave Smith, if either one of those guys had started talking about MMA, right? Like Joe probably would have been the guy they would have deferred to. Now they could all study the history of MMA in ways and maybe know like each individual fight and understand stats and everything else better than Joe Rogan, but we would still give some deference to Joe as somebody that's actually stepped into the ring and actually conducted some of this. And so I don't think it's something where you have to be an expert to have an opinion, or even a very, very good opinion, or even a well-informed opinion. It's just about kind of understanding where we're coming from when we kind of weight what it is that we're looking at. And then ultimately the object is to arrive at the truth. And if we can define truth as that which reflects reality, well, then obviously we all have limitations on what we can possibly know. We can't have total, complete, and comprehensive knowledge. But the more knowledge you have and the more perspectives you've been able to look at and the more you've been able to experience stuff, well, then theoretically you should be able to come up with a very high value opinion on what's true in any given situation.
Right. I mean, the academic, the hobbyist, the journalist, and the experienced can all have the same, arrive at the same conclusion and same opinion if the idea comports with reality. I guess the question is, which one of these people offering up an opinion do we have the most sort of trust or deference to, in terms of like, how big of the grain of salt is it that you're giving it when somebody says something? So, but it's possible for everyone to say an idea that's true no matter where they're coming from in terms of level of expertise. Would you say, are there limits to sort of academic knowledge, or it's just sort of a different thing that's valuable versus experience? Is there a hierarchy there?
Well, what I do is I look at, like, so first of all, if we can all agree that there is such a thing as truth, which by the way, we don't all agree on anymore. Like, it's amazing to me that half the time when I'm debating with somebody, I will think we both have this commitment to truth and the laws of logic and, reasoning. And then all of a sudden it goes in a direction.
Patriarchy.
Exactly. No, like, I wish that was the joke, right? Like, but it's real. Like, you will have people that once they get backed into a corner because they've either said something that's horribly contradictory or just absurd, their next step is then to be like, oh, well, of course you would say that, you're a straight white man. Like, okay, how does that factor into this? So that's the first thing I look at, is like, if two people are actually arguing in good faith and have a basic commitment to there is such a thing as truth, we can use things like reason and experience and knowledge to arrive at a true or a good answer. Well, then great, you can have a productive conversation. What I tend to look for is, again, I look for that combination of who is demonstrating those things first, and then secondly, some degree of historical or what we might call intellectual knowledge on a particular topic, combined with some degree of practical experience. So if I'm going into a conversation and I know someone has that baseline commitment with both intellectual and practical experience, I tend to give their opinion deference until they say something that is verifiably false or contradictory. And so this is the part where the layman can get it right and the experts can get it wrong. And, Dave Smith brought up the whole thing with like COVID. We had a lot of people that had extensive experience and education and everything who got all kinds of crap wrong. And in large part because they weren't even talking within their field, right? They were saying, I know a lot about epidemiology, and so now I'm going to tell you how the economy should run during that. And so that's what I look at. That's kind of like my measure and my starting point. But the good news about truth is that the layman can be right and the expert can be wrong. But if I'm betting money, like now all of a sudden where it's not just hypothetical theory, but if I'm betting money, well then, I'm going to give a certain degree of deference to that kind of comprehensive expertise until it demonstrates itself to be false or wrong.
I think the real variable is like, that changes things, is when you give any kind of expert or anybody in any field at any level political power, that their opinions can then be imposed on other people, which is what we saw during COVID. Then the stakes are much higher, the consequences are much higher, and they usually don't pay that price politically or even in their own lives for decisions that are imposed on other people. So we're not just looking at ideas to inform us and guide us and direct us, but rather mandate us how to do things. That becomes a bigger problem. I think people conflate that time period where we were pairing political power with expertise in epidemiology and then saying public health policy is then imposed to affect all sorts of myriad of issues. Then you have real problems.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, Thomas Sowell talks about in his book, Intellectuals in Society, where he does a great job of kind of breaking down this distinction that, in the way he defines intellectual, which you could also maybe say expert on some degree, but he says that an intellectual is someone that essentially pays no practical price for being wrong.
Right.
And that's another important factor that I consider when I listen to somebody talking about something is what is the price they pay for being wrong, because the threshold is much different. The consequences are much different. And excuse me, it impacts the way that people make decisions. But yeah, to your point, there's something even more, potentially catastrophic when now you're making decisions for millions of other people and you can impose your will using legal force, right? That's a very different world.
Yes, for sure. I wanted to just move on now into the details and the brass tacks of the war in Gaza over the last 18 months, because there's been a lot of opinions offered up by what you could say are people who read about the situation and, come to conclusions. Particularly, like, I had a debate with Dave Smith a little while back, and one of the sticking points he kept trying to sort of end off with was, ultimately, we have to ask ourselves, does Israel have to do this? Like, he's looking at the optics. It's always horrible. It's always difficult to watch, especially a war like this that's kind of unprecedented in how much it's been broadcast on such a wide scale, not just in mainstream news, but social media. And his question ultimately is, does Israel have to do this? And recently this came up again. He's like Israel doesn't have to do this. And then we had a Twitter exchange, and I was like, well, ultimately, if it can be demonstrated to you that Israel does have to do this, then you might be more pro-Israel than you think. It might just be a choice between bad and worse. But for you, looking at it from your perspective with your background, seeing what's going on in Gaza and seeing the destruction, you're seeing what's happened and how Israel's conducted itself over the last 18 months. Are there no other options? Does Israel have to do this? Dave said they could send in special forces. They could do this. And I'm like, what do you think they do? Like, I have a cousin who went in to try to rescue hostages. Like, what do you think that is? So can you just shed some light on that as somebody who sees the situation? Like, what do you see?
Yeah, this is the part where I get into what I refer to as people conducting Excel spreadsheet warfare, which is to say that they take two...